Hello boys and girls. In this video, we'll be comparing the value of fractions. When making comparisons, we'll use symbols such as less than, greater than, and equal to. When comparing fractions, there are basically three situations we may encounter. The easiest is when the fractions being compared have the same denominator, and I'll model that in this video. Sometimes the fractions being compared might have the same numerator, and again, we'll explore that situation in this video. The most difficult situation is when the fractions that are being compared have different denominators and different numerators. We will definitely spend a lot of time on those examples. Let's start out with fractions that have the same denominator. For the example, we'll use the fractions 5/8 and 3/8. Notice that both fractions have the denominator of 8. I'll use an area model to show you the value of each. For 5/8, I will have 8 equal pieces, 5 of which are shaded. For the fraction 3/8, there'll be 8 equal pieces, 3 of which are shaded. Looking at my area models, it's pretty easy to see that the 5/8 is greater than the 3/8. 5 shaded pieces take up more space than 3 shaded pieces. I could also say that 3/8 is less than 5/8. Again, 3 pieces are less than 5 pieces. Notice that I'm looking mostly at my numerators when I make that comparison. Here's a rule to help you remember. When the fractions being compared have the same denominator, compare the value of the numerators. Pause the video and try these in your notebook. Now check your answers. I hope you did well. Let's try another situation. Sometimes the fractions that we are comparing may have the same numerator. In this example, we'll use the fractions 1/4 and 1/5. Notice that both fractions have a numerator of 1. Again, we'll use an area model to demonstrate this. For 1/4, I will need 4 equal pieces, 1 of which is shaded. For the fraction 1/5, I will need 5 equal pieces, 1 of which is shaded. If I look closely, you'll see that the value of 1/4 is greater than 1/5. Or I could say that 1/5 is less than 1/4. You'll also notice by looking at the area model that if there are only 4 pieces, the pieces are larger. If there are 5 pieces, they are smaller. So if I have a large denominator, each piece would have to be smaller and smaller to fit in the area model. Here's the rule to remember. When the fractions being compared have the same numerator, remember that the smaller denominators are greater in value, and we saw that in the area models. Pause this video and try these in your notebook. Now check your answers. How did you do? I hope you did well. The final type of comparison is the most difficult. When we make comparisons of fractions whose numerators and denominators are different from one another. In this example, we'll use the fraction 3/4 and 5/7. Notice that they have nothing in common. We'll use an area model to demonstrate. For 3/4, I would need 4 equal pieces, 3 of which are shaded. For 5/7, I would need 7 equal pieces, 5 of which are shaded. It's a little tricky to see. In fact, we'll find that we do need other strategies to help us, but 3/4 is greater in value than 5/7. It's a close one, but it is true. I could also say that 5/7 is less than 3/4 because the area for 5 out of 7 is smaller than the area for 3 out of 4. Now this example is pretty difficult to judge just by looking at a picture. So let me show you a couple strategies that will help when comparing fractions that have different numerators and different denominators. One strategy is to find a common denominator and then compare the numerators, because we know how to do that from earlier in this video. You're going to have to remember what you've learned about equivalent fractions. Think about our original fractions 3/4 and 5/7. We can think of all the equivalent fractions for 3/4 by using several techniques. I like the multiples method. If I look in my numerators, I'll have the multiples of 3. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. And if I look in my denominators, I'm using my multiples of 4, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. That's enough for now. And I can do a similar technique for my fraction 5/7. Here are just a few. I'm going to stop because you might notice right away that there are two fractions, both of which have the denominator of 28. If I use the common denominator of 28 to compare the fractions, it makes it much easier. 21 over 28 is greater than 20 over 28. This is the first scenario that we looked at earlier in this video. When they have the same denominator, I compare my numerators. Now this could be a little bit messy in your notebooks to list all of these equivalent fractions until you find just the perfect two to compare. So let me show you a trick that might help you. When I think about 3/4 and the equivalent fraction that would be the easiest to use, I'm going to look at the denominator of my other fraction. It's 7. I'll use the magic 1 of 7/7 to make my new equivalent fraction. And so 3/4 times 7/7, which is really just 1, we're using the identity property of multiplication, my product is 21 over 28. And now I'll do the same technique on my fraction 5/7. Using the 4, I'll use the magic 1 of 4/4. 5/7 times 4/4 equals 20 over 28. Now that my fractions have the same denominator, the comparisons are very easy to see. 21 over 28 is greater than 20 over 28. Or I could say that 20 over 28 is less than 21 over 28. Boy, that really was close, wasn't it? Then since I know that these comparisons are true, and these are equivalent fractions, I can now conclude that 3/4 is greater than 5/7, or I could say that 5/7 is less than 3/4. And so I've proven it with my magic 1 technique. Pause this video and try these in your notebook using the equivalent fraction magic 1 technique for yourself. Now check your answers. Okay, so that was a lot of work. Let me show you another technique that's also helpful when comparing fractions with different numerators and different denominators. We call this the cross multiply and compare products technique, and we'll use the same fractions as before. The fractions we're comparing are 3/4 and 5/7. In the last example, we found the common denominator of 28, and then we compared those equivalent fractions. This technique is a little bit different. I'm going to use my cross multiplication to help me. And so if I go from the 7 up to the 3, I'm going up on an angle. 7 times 3 is 21. And now I'll do the same thing starting at my 4 in my denominator. 4 times 5 is 20. Well, those numbers remind me of the numerators of my equivalent fractions from before. And I remember from that comparison that 21 was greater than 20. And therefore, 3/4 is greater than 5/7. So really, this technique isn't much different than what we did earlier. We're just not showing the complete equivalent fraction whose denominator was 28. This is a little bit shorter and quicker in your notebooks. Pause the video and try these in your notebook. Now check your answers. I hope you did well. Boys and girls, the best way to learn these techniques is to practice them. And that's what we're going to do for the rest of the year. We're going to practice all these strategies to compare fractions whose denominators might be the same, they may be different, and you'll learn to use different strategies to help you decide. Have fun!